Rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Astaghfirullah, 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 inna Allaha ghafurur rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. We give thanks to the Almighty Allah who has made it possible for us to be present here today. The world is in the middle of a crisis, the like of which has not been seen in a generation or even in generations. And I think for some reason, the responsibility, we all have individual responsibilities, we all have collective responsibilities to ensure that we are amongst those that would have succeeded during this time, both intellectually and spiritually as well. Because the affairs of a Muslim is a wonderful one. When something good, we say happens, we say Alhamdulillah. When something challenging happens as well, we also give glory and thanks to the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And I think what we are facing right now presents us an opportunity. All of a sudden, people who didn't know much about something before are now becoming expert in it overnight. But of course, the danger of becoming an expert in something overnight is that you are likely to get into pitfalls. You are likely to make mixed calculations. You are likely to create misinformation, because there are people who have been working in this field for a very long time, and it's always expected of us to always recognize and respect opinions, respect and understand where they're coming from, because basically this is what they've been doing all their lives. We can give multiple examples, but because of time, we wouldn't want to. We would rather take it away from here and just kickstart this discussion. I know very much that there will be lots of questions. Inshallah, Allah will give us the opportunity to be able to answer some of those questions to the best of our abilities. And also as well, we'll try to make it as simple as possible, not very complicated. But of course, the real objective itself is for us to enlighten ourselves, to get us on the right track. And without wasting too much time, we've combined together, that is Dr. Fauzia and I, we've both agreed to do this as a shared presentation. So without wasting much time, I will hand over to Dr. Fauzia to kickstart this discussion. Doctor, please, are you ready?
Yes.
Bismillah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Thank Almighty Allah for giving us opportunities to be all here to listen to this intellectual discussion, and I pray to Almighty Allah that it will make it a beneficial one for us as individuals and collectively. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. I'll start by introducing the topic on COVID-19 vaccine. And we all know that the COVID virus was actually declared as a public health pandemic by the WHO on the 31st of December last year. So we're 1 year down the line, and it has been a struggle, it has been a battle, with different measures being taken and advice has been taken. We've had the lockdowns, we've had the wash your hands, use face mask, and all of these attempts were all in an attempt to slow down the virus. There hasn't been a cure discovered for this virus. There have been different interventions, critical interventions that have been taken, that have been used to help those who have been affected to survive. But we all know that it has been, there has been a lot of casualties as a result of this vaccine. The medical supplies have been exhausted. The healthcare professionals have, they have been, they're tired. You know, people have fallen sick, people feel exhausted, people have suffered trauma, a lot of trauma as a result of the pandemic. As a result, or in as well as all of these measures that have taken place, it has become incumbent that a vaccine is what is needed. You know, various, you know, viral regimes have been tried, and we all know that there's no specific one that cures it. It works in some people, it doesn't work as well in other people. So a vaccine is incumbent, and we all know that the COVID-19 is a novel virus, and therefore whatever treatment or whatever vaccine is going to be developed is going to be a new vaccine. And there have been several vaccines that have been, you know, that have, you know, happened. And in the course of all of this, the most recent one that we've had, it's the Pfizer vaccine and the AstraZeneca one, which have all recently been approved. Lots of trials are being done before these vaccines are being rolled out. Dr. Next slide, please. Coronavirus looks like worldwide. And currently we've had at least 89 million cases of this viral infection in the last 1 year. And as a result, 2 million people have died from this virus alone. And we know that these figures are actually above what is being reported, because even in the UK, the care home deaths were not recorded at the start of it. And also we know that in on the developed countries, the testing was not available, and you know, there were lots of logistics at the start of it. So it's just to give us a rough idea. So we have 89 million cases, and we've had 2 million deaths. In the UK, we've had at 2 cases. Slide, the UK currently is the second. You know, when you look at the population per infection rate, we are rating second. And that's for us here in the UK, it is actually a concern. We can see that even the United States, that is a much bigger country, has done a bit better than we have. Sorry, I'm Lebanon, and currently Nigeria is not on it, but we know that in Nigeria, the cases of death and the number of cases have increased. I spoke with my brother-in-law, I think 2 days ago, and they had confirmed cases of at least 800 cases. And, you know, like I said, in Nigeria, things are underreported, under testing is there. So we do know that even in Nigeria, it's becoming a greater concern. Next slide, please. So why do we need the vaccine? Why do we need vaccination at all? We do know that currently at least 20 diseases are being either controlled or eradicated or cured as a result of the vaccines. If we think about young children, 8 weeks old, you've carried your baby for 9 months, down the line, you're taking them down to the doctors to have vaccines. Has anyone ever wondered how many vaccinations this baby have for the first 8 weeks of their life, for the first 12 weeks of their life? Eventually, when they're 1 year old, more vaccines. We haven't really thought about what is the implication of it. You know, all we are concerned about is protecting our children, protecting our babies, and the same thing with vaccine. We do know that vaccines save millions of lives each year, and this is by training the body's immune system to fight foreign bodies, things that are foreign to the body that could eventually cause diseases and death if not taken care of. Next slide, please. Okay, so types of vaccine. There are different types of vaccines. We have inactivated or weakened viruses, which means these are the real viruses. They have been identified, they weaken, and then they introduced into the body as a form of vaccine, and that will help our body to recognize them and produce immune response that will fight the vaccines. We have protein-based vaccines, which are just basically a protein part of the virus. Okay, so right, a protein part of the virus that is being used, the harmless fragments, and they're being used to help the body to recognize these viruses when we come into contact with them. We've got the RNA and the DNA vaccines, which are genetically engineered to create a protein that itself generates an immune response in our body, so that when we have again the actual disease or we come out in contact with the actual virus, then the body is able to recognize it and fight it off. We have the viral vector vaccines, and again, these are again genetically engineered viruses, very similar to the natural ones, that is being introduced to the body to help the body recognize the actual virus when we do come in contact with them. Currently, the 3 on the list are the ones that have been approved, obviously there are several logistics to do some of these vaccines, especially the first ones that were approved, which is the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, because of the extreme temperatures which they are kept and which they are stored. The AstraZeneca one is much easier. It's very similar to the sort of conditions or cold chain that we are used to, but the Moderna one and the Pfizer ones, there are logistics, which is why there's been a slow uptake or a slow availability of these vaccines. Next slide, please. Right, so the Pfizer vaccine, which was the first one that was approved, the first dose doesn't give you an immediate immunity. It takes at least 10 to 12 days for you to build up the immunity. So we're looking at about 50 to 70% build up in your immunity when you received your first vaccine after the first 1 week. And that means that you still have to carrying on the measures to protect yourself, because if you do come into contact with the virus, you do not have complete immunity to fight the vaccine and to fight the virus. The second dose is advised on day 21, which is after the first 3 weeks, and a week after that, you do get full immunity to the virus. Next one, please. Right, so how does this new vaccine work, which is what a lot of people worry about? Scientists have worked together. They identified the genetic code of this virus. I think they did that within the first 1 month of the WHO announcing that this was a global pandemic. So the genetic code of that virus was identified and turned into a vaccine. And when that is then injected into people, the body produces cells, and these cells will produce the coronavirus spike protein, and that will now stimulate the immune system of the body to produce antibodies, which are soldiers, to fight this virus. And it also activates our T cells to destroy this actual virus. So it's 2 ways. You produce soldiers to fight it, and you also produce the T cells, which actually destroy those cells, identified by their spike protein. And then in the future, if you do actually get exposed to the virus, these antibodies and T cells are triggered, and they will help you fight off the virus. Next slide, please. Right, so talking about the safety and the efficacy of these new vaccines. The actual injection itself, like any other injection, everyone, or most likely everyone will experience some sort of pain. Either immediately you get the injection, a few days or a few hours after getting the injection. There has been very low report of any serious adverse incident, both in those patients that went through the trial. When you're having trials, you have real patients. Well, you have all of them, patients are real, but some people get given the real product, and some people get given placebo, which is they're not giving the actual product. They're just giving maybe like normal saline or water, but that is just to reduce the bias in the studies. And the actual studies shows that the vaccine confers at least 95% protection against COVID-19 in those that are 16 or older. So the actual trial was done in adults. So they're still undergoing trials for those in age 12 to 15. So the current vaccines that are available are just for adults and not been licensed yet in any younger age group. Next slide, please. Right, so the end result of any vaccine or this current vaccine is they look at the safety. Is this safe to give, and does it work? And in the process of the trials, all of these things are being taken into consideration. Some trials are actually stopped because it's not safe. And some trials are safe, but they don't give you the efficacy that is needed to actually say, okay, it's worthwhile. So this trial to produce these Moderna and AstraZeneca vaccines have passed through this. And the FDA have actually confirmed that, this actually prevents severe illness or respiratory failure or any, renal problems, kidney problems, liver problems, or at least admissions into ITU or death. So if you come across, if you come into contact with the virus after having the vaccine, the likelihood of you having any of these problems is less than 95%. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's less than 95. It's 95% and above. Next slide, please. So the actual trial for the Moderna vaccine was conducted at over 152 sites, and this was worldwide in Argentina, USA, Brazil, Turkey. These are not the only countries, but across 152 sites worldwide, and this is just to help us understand that these trials were not conducted in one site. It was not done in one lab or in one country. It was done all across the globe, and the resources or the informations were all put together before decisions are taken on the safety and the efficacy. So we shouldn't undermine these trials. At least over 40,000 people were involved in the trial. And during the course of the trial, there were only 2 deaths, and they were not actually related to the vaccine, but they were just all the causes of death. I need to emphasize that the trials was not done again in young adolescents, those below the age of 16. It was not done in children, and it's not been tried on pregnant women. Next slide, please. Right, so in summary, measures have been put in place: lockdown, wash hands, face masks. All of this is just to reduce or to slow down the transmission of the virus. Ultimately, treatment or vaccine is what is needed. And currently what we have available is the vaccine. Alongside with all of these other measures, we all need to do our own role in reducing the morbidity, which is the illness, the number of people that are ending up on ICU beds, the number of people that are clogging up the beds in hospital. People are not only dying as a result of this virus, they are dying because they can't get their treatment, because people sick from this virus have occupied their beds. They can't be sent out sick. You can go in, so you get more sick and you can get the treatment that you need to get. So we have to look at it from not just the virus, but from a bigger picture. There's people have lost their source of livelihood. People have, we have patients that we've lost as a result of the virus. People have lost their job. People's mental well-being is not ideal. We've lost patients as a result of this virus, not because they've contracted the virus, but because they've been isolated, they've got mental health issues, they can't get access to these, so we have to look at it in a holistic way, and appreciate that a lot of work has been put in place to arrive at a possible solution, or a possible way out for us with this situation where we found ourselves. Next slide, please. So my take is, Islamically, we have history of pandemics in the past and epidemics, and as Muslims, it is our it is our duty to protect ourselves from illnesses and death. We can't just fold our hands and say, oh, Allah Yakau, which is what the Hausa people will say, that you know, we can't just fold our hands. We have to, you know, follow the guidelines. We need to follow what we've been told by those that know better than ourselves. We all can be doctors. We all can be producing vaccines. We all can be, you know, preferring our own solution to this pandemic that we found ourselves. Our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had spoke about the concept of quarantine over 1,400 years ago, and the decision to vaccinate ourselves is a personal decision, obviously, but we must make sure that we're well informed, that we know what the scientific evidence are. We trust those people in authority, and let ourselves not be swayed away or discouraged by all this anti-vax and people who constantly carry fake news. We all know that fake news prior to the pandemic has been something that has had a boom since social media had a boom. So it's not surprising that, you know, there are so many misinformation out there. And like Daddy Farida said earlier on, we shouldn't be passing misinformation. We should all try and share the information that we get from reliable sources. So I'll hand over the rest of the discussion to Dr. Ahmed Balogun. He's a pharmaceutical doctor, so he knows a lot more about this. Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakallah khairan. So yeah, I mean, just to briefly introduce myself, I mean, many of you know me as a doctor as well, but just to let you know, I just to give you a perspective, my role essentially, alhamdulillah, we're lucky to have you know, 2 doctors being part of this group who have very different experience. So Dr. Fauzia has a very in-depth community experience with what's happening on the ground and what's actually happening in terms of the impact of the disease itself on people. My perspective, for those who don't know, I mean, I stopped working for the NHS almost 10 years ago. So I currently work for a drug development company. So, and I've been part of, so for the past 10 years, what I've been involved with is mainly, you know, developing new drugs, bringing them to the market and making sure that those drugs are safe. That's been the primary focus of what I do every day. And that's why I said at the beginning that it's a bit unfair for us to expect people to suddenly begin to understand all of these things overnight. Many of us have spent years looking at this information, studying all these things and trying to, before we even formed our own judgment on those things. So I do give people room to doubt, but of course, I always tell people that, look, when you are in doubt, always look for information. And I think that's why I'm starting with this very first slide itself, which is essentially, you know, talking about misinformation. And this was taken directly from the WHO site, and they always encourage that one of the biggest battles they are fighting right now is not the battle of you know, some of these common diseases. It's the battle of misinformation. Now, what misinformation does is that it doesn't only create mistrust in that particular issue that you're trying to deal with, it creates mistrust in other areas that which you don't even expect. And as humans, we begin to fill in the blanks. We begin to put answers, make up our own answers as we go along, which of course is a very dangerous thing. And they've given this slide as an example. Somebody received false information. Out of those, the person, he passed it on to 3 people. Okay. Now, one of them decided to, you know, do the right thing, you know, didn't forward the rumor onwards. 2 of them said, okay, we know what, I'm going to forward it on. And you can see what happens, how this propagates itself like a chain reaction. But because only 2 people, just to look at what happened when 2 people refused to pass this information onward, you can see how much reduced that level. So you can see how big the impact could be if just two people had, you know, had said they are not going to pass this information for us. So always keep up at the back of our mind whenever we come across information, read, understand. If you don't understand it, there's no point forwarding information you do not understand to other people. So I think that's something which I wanted to start with. I'll move on to the next slide. Now, common COVID-19 vaccine concerns. So for those of you who may not know, when the pandemic hit, one of the things the governments of the world did, in particular the American government did, was to launch what they call the Operation Warp Speed. And this essentially is to accelerate the timeline necessary to develop a vaccine. Now, under normal condition, it takes us about 7 to 10 years to come up with one. We've been talking about Ebola for a very long time, and it was only in 2019 that eventually we were able to get the vaccine for Ebola. We've been talking about other conditions like HIV for a very long time. Again, there's been work on the vaccine. I'm not really sure one has been approved or one has even been found to be very efficacious in preventing HIV. But the question now is, which of course is a valid question, is how come we're able to develop this one within a year of knowing coming across the disease itself? So I think that's a valid question for any average person to ask. Question is, why should I trust the vaccine approval process? Yes, people ask that question, again, very valid questions. Are the new genetic vaccine technologies the same as gene therapy? Which is okay, is a good question to ask as well, particularly if you don't even understand what genetic disorders are or what vaccine technology itself stands for. How do we know vaccines work? Very, very common questions with vaccines. And the reason why people ask, how do we know it works? Because when we give vaccines, you give vaccines to people who are not sick. Okay, you give it to people who are not sick. Unlike when you have a headache, it is when you have a headache, you take paracetamol. You don't take paracetamol before you have a headache. You take it when you've had a headache. So you can tell whether the headache goes away or not. But in the case of vaccine, the only way you would know it doesn't, the only way you would know it has worked is if you don't get the disease. But the question is, there are other people who didn't get it as well, who didn't get the disease. So the question is, how do I know that that vaccine is what actually prevented me from getting that condition itself? So again, it's a very complicated area, and I think it is a valid question for so many of us to ask and try to understand who was included in the trials. And I think Dr. Fauzia mentioned some of the things that have been done as well, some of the trials. Again, I think hopefully, inshallah, would expatiate more on this point as we go along. And of course, the two final points is, how do we know the vaccines are safe and what side effects should we expect? So hopefully we would begin to talk more about it. Now, how do we develop vaccines? And again, as I said at the beginning, what I do on a regular basis is developing new treatments and also including vaccines as well. Now, what we tend to do is just to give us a crash course on how we develop all these new treatments. And I'll use the COVID vaccine as an example as well. So typically what happens is there's an early phase, okay, we call the phase 1 trials. Before we get to the phase 1 trials, we would have done preclinical studies. Now, these preclinical studies, you would have tested the medicine in animals to see how animals react to it before you now begin to test it in human being as well. And phase 1, you look for 100 people, 100 volunteers. Some of us might have heard when they were shouting for volunteers to come and take the drug itself. Those were very brave people. They're very brave people, and many of these people have done they're taking the risk on our behalf when they went in 100 people, so that if something happened to those 100 people, you don't go to phase 2. So then you go ahead to phase 2, where you now try to do this in a larger population of people. Now, phase 1, you are testing which dose is kind of safe. Is it really safe at all? Phase 2, you are testing, well, is it safe? And also, what dose do we think is going to work very well? Or do we think it's going to be okay to actually take this forward? Now, phase 3, and this is pretty large. And I must confess to you, in my years working in new drug development, this is unprecedented, because it's always one of the real challenges for us is getting people who would volunteer. But this time around, there was a large number of people who were willing to volunteer. We heard it in the news. There was media coverage, there was social media promotions and everything. People lined up such that people, if in certain instances, they have to turn people back. We don't get that every day for most trials. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because people are asking the question, why is it that we're able to do this very quickly? It's because the whole world came together because we saw this as a problem. We saw this as a problem which is affecting we as a humanity as well. And that's why people always joke that maybe when the only time we can all unite as humanity is maybe when we have an alien invasion. Now we have had our own version of an alien invasion, which is in the form of a vaccine, and we've all come together to try to come up with a solution to the problem. And I think that is what is different this time around. And in this occasion, the trial was able to be conducted in over 30,000 people. And if in the case of the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, it was in 40,000, more than 40,000 people. The one that has been developed by Johnson & Johnson, I think they're targeting 60,000 people. And like that, many, many big trials like that, which are ongoing around the world. Now, why was it so quick? And, it's called Operation Warp Speed. And, for those who are very familiar with Star Trek and all this, they understand what a warp speed means. I mean, which is traveling faster than the speed of light. That's how fast it is. And of course, it's a true reflection of what has gone on this time around. Now, I said at the beginning that traditionally, if you look at the top slide, the top section of the slide, it shows you what happens traditionally. So first and foremost, you do your preclinical trials. That takes you up almost 2 years. After that, you do your phase 1 trial, which typically takes 1 year. Then you now have phase 2, phase 3. By the time you finish all of this, you would have taken almost 8-9 years. Now, the question is, why does it take this long? Well, every time you finish one phase, you have to go back to the regulators and tell them, look, I finished phase 1. Can I go to phase 2? Now, what happens is that when you go back to the government will say, wait, there are people on the queue. Okay, we have 10, 15 people on the queue. When it is your turn, we'll let you come in. Okay, you come in, you present, they look at the data you've presented, they say, oh yeah, it's safe, you can go ahead. Then you now start looking for phase 1. At times, some of these companies, they get stuck. There is no money to carry on because all these stages in the trial cost a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time for you to recruit people that will be willing to partake in the trial itself. Now, all of this takes time, and each time you go back to the government or you go back to the regulators, they will tell you, go and look for more information or wait a bit more. Or on the average, for example, when you go to the European Medicines Agency, it takes them an average of maybe about more than 6 months for them to even begin to look at your data to start with, because there's a long queue, there's a waiting list, and you have to wait for your turn before it gets there. Now, what's different this time around is that we've decided to cut all the red tapes. Okay, there is no waiting queue. Preclinicals, the companies were willing to take a risk. The moment they went into phase 1 trial, the moment they agreed, they understood what they were dealing with, they knew what the problem was, they just went straight into phase 1 trial. As they were starting the phase 1 trial, which I mentioned earlier, it takes about 100 people, they're already planning for phase 2. In fact, they already started recruiting for phase 2 right before the end of phase 1 trial. So they did everything at the same time. And typically, because of the way things happen in the industry, it's a very competitive environment. So many companies hold on to their information. They don't release it for commercial reasons. But this time around, they decided to break all those barriers. As they were getting new data, they were letting the regulators know about it, that we found this is what we've seen. Can we go ahead? They tell them to go ahead. So they were able to plan all those phases together. And one of the things which it did, which was unbelievable as well, which we don't typically do, is like somebody who is trying to I don't know the best example to give, but you haven't really planned how you're going to do everything. You're already preparing how you're going to manufacture it. So right from the beginning, companies had started planning how they will manufacture, even without knowing whether it's going to work or not. And people say, oh, how do you know, why should they do that? Well, it's a risk that they're willing to take, because the government has provided significant funding and backing that would allow them to be able to do those things. So government has agreed to say, okay, you know what, if you try it and it fails, don't worry, we'll write it off for you. And for some companies, they've actually failed. Like for example, GSK, for example, they are also trying as well, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Their own drug has failed, their own vaccine has failed. So we shouldn't take it for granted that some succeeded, because by the way, some others failed as well. So they've already started manufacturing such that and this second slide I showed here, this lower slide section here, is just showing you what we were actually projecting April last year. So this second section was April last year. We're thinking, well, best case scenario, maybe we'll get something ready by the end of, by the middle of this year, which is 2021. But as Allah would have it, things move very quickly. The regulators responded even faster than we had expected. And of course, that's why we are able to have, 2 vaccines approved in the UK already. And of course, also in the US as well. Next slide. So this is, again, just to, I won't go over this, I'll just show you very quickly just to see what happens. I mentioned that we have preclinical trials, in which case you test it in animals. After then you submit the information, you go to phase 1, you go to phase 2, like that. And that's how long it takes for us to actually come up with one drug product on the market. So the reason I've left this slide here is to just show us what happens, because people are really concerned about some of these vaccines. And one thing we should always keep at the back of our mind is that we need to be rational in the way we look at information and the way we assess information. I suspect many of us on this call would have received one vaccine or the other in their lifetime. At least commonly, I know we all growing up, particularly those who were born and brought up in Nigeria, would have had to receive the BCG vaccine, for example. Every one of us has the mark, has a logo on our hands that we actually received this vaccine growing up very early on. In fact, you are not allowed to, I remember that you are not allowed to even get the birth certificate of your child if you don't receive it. And that is as far back as we can tell, growing up in a place like Nigeria. Many of our healthcare workers in this country, and even in many parts of the world as well, it is mandatory for you to receive vaccines, certain vaccines, before you begin to work in the healthcare system. So it's not new for us receiving vaccines. And of course, finally, again, as we're all Muslims on this call, you can't go to Hajj without presenting your immunized vaccination certificate, which is, I think, either is hepatitis C or hepatitis B. I can't remember which one it is. You have to present that certificate before you're allowed to even granted a visa to even visit. And why do they do that? Because they are concerned that where you are coming from, that hepatitis C is a problem. So we don't want you to bring it into our country and then create another problem for us, which of course would have resulted in its own version of an epidemic during Hajj. So they tell you to take those vaccines to make sure that you don't come to create problem. And quite frankly, moving forward, it is very likely that they would be asking for these vaccines as well for COVID-19, because just imagine what would happen when people are in Hajj or doing Hajj and something spreads like that, like a wildfire. It is going to be uncontrollable, and it's going to result in massive casualties. So it is very likely that they will make it compulsory moving forward, that even for you to even get on the plane, for you to even get a visa, you may have to get one of these vaccines as well. Now, just this one very quickly, viral vectors. Now, what's different here? Now, the reason I'm showing this again is that we all remember the BCG vaccine. I want to make a comparison. Now, what happens with the BCG vaccine, which we receive for tuberculosis, which I said many of us would have received? You take tuberculosis itself, okay, because that's how we develop vaccines. You take the tuberculosis itself, you weaken it or you kill it, you weaken it a bit, then you now make it into like a solution, then you inject it into people. Now, many of us may not be aware of this, that actually what they're injecting is actually tuberculosis itself. There is weakened form of the tuberculosis. And what that actually does is that it triggers a response in our body to prepare itself as if the real tuberculosis is coming to attack. But science has advanced over the years with all these other vaccines. And that's why we're able to have different types. And of course, this is an example of one of such types whereby you don't have to take the whole thing. You don't have to even kill it. Just take a small section, just cut a piece out of the vaccine itself. And that's the red piece you are seeing here. Cut that piece, and that's what they've done with the COVID vaccine. in the case of the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, they've cut a piece of it to present to you as if it is a real thing. But in actual fact, it is not a real thing. And that is why it's not possible for you to get COVID when you take this vaccine, because it is not, you're not giving you the coronavirus itself. Now, in terms of the Pfizer clinical trials, this is just a diagram showing you what actually happened during that trial. Now, what happens with these trials is that you give everybody something that looks the same, but not everybody is receiving the same. Some will receive the real vaccine, some will receive what we call the placebo, which essentially is nothing, it's just ordinary water. Okay, so not everybody on the vaccine trial actually received the vaccine. Some actually received ordinary water, but we don't know because you do what we call blinding. So when they give it, they blind it, they don't know who has taken what. But what they will now do is they will now wait for people to, maybe something to happen, okay? Now, when they reached the certain number they were looking for, when they found out that 170 people in that trial has been confirmed to have COVID-19, what they now did was to do what we call unblinding. So you now open the envelope to see, okay, look, what is Mr. A taking? What is Mr. B taking? Now, we found out that 8 of those who were on the vaccine, okay, came down with COVID. Now, 162 of those who did not receive the vaccine came down, which is a massive difference. So in real life, if you want to say where would you want to belong, definitely I would want to belong in the group of the people who received the vaccine, because you can see the difference in the number. And when we multiply this number in a large population, you can begin to see how it becomes a very massive difference, speaking at the global scales, by the time you put that into thousands or millions. So just a show of what really happens and how this is shown. Alhamdulillah, Dr. Fauzi has talked about some of the reactions. And again, it's always very important for us to remind ourselves about, no drug is 100% safe or even effective, okay? There are concerns, which will always happen. And again, in the interest of transparency, these are some of the most common concerns that people had when they took the medicine, when they took the vaccine. For the Pfizer vaccine, 72% complete of pain. Yes, we expect that to happen. You're sticking a needle in someone's arm, you expect them to have pain. So that is not surprising. About half of them complained of fatigue, which again is something which may not be uncommon because you are injecting even ordinary saline. If you inject ordinary saline, people might complain of fatigue, and that could be for a very short period. It could be for 1 minute, it could be for 5 minutes. And that's how we record all this information. Whether you complain for even for a very brief period of time, we record it as a fatigue itself. Then almost half complained of headache again, many of which were mild to moderate headache, muscle pain, chills, which again is feeling as if you're feeling cold, joint pain, fever, and also 1% complained of vomiting as well. Now, if you look at all of this, I'm very sure when if you decide to take a survey of everyone on this call, even despite the fact that none of us have received the vaccine, I'm very sure in the last 6 months, at least more than half of us would have had 1 or 2 of these complaints, and though we've not even taken the vaccine. So in reality, we can't really say that it's because they took the vaccines that they actually had this reaction. These reactions may have even occurred without taking the vaccine itself. So, but again, in the interest of transparency, we need to let people know what has actually happened so that people can, really understand the perspective. And again, that if this happens, it's not as if it's the end of the world, but it's just a possibility. Now, why do we have concerns about vaccine itself? And again, I did mention this because for almost all the trainings I've attended in the past, where we've talked about, why people have, this fear about vaccines, is because, there are valid concerns. To be quite frank, historically, naturally, many of us mistrust authority. Okay, and even commoner within, Black and ethnic minorities, generally speaking. Some of you may not know of this Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which occurred in the US between 1952 and 1972. this was mainly an experiment that was conducted in blacks, and unfortunately, some of this was not done in the right way. It was done dangerously, and they only did it on black people. And even when treatment became available to treat the condition that they were suffering from, they didn't give them treatment. They allowed them because they were using it to study the disease that they were actually experimenting on, which is very shameful and it's a disgrace. And people were arrested and people were locked up. But it wasn't until 1990 something when Clinton officially made a formal apology and tried to make compensation for those who had been affected by this. So some of these things are still very fresh in people's memory, particularly in places like the United States, where some of these things had happened. Henrietta Lacks, I don't want to go into too much details. This, again, for those who are familiar with the scientific community, you can read about it. It's called ELA cells. Again, they had been using our cells in conducting experiments for decades. And again, this is another black lady. And it was not until recently that people began to talk about all these things. And, and again, it's essentially shows discrimination within the healthcare delivery system. And again, we all see it every day. Now, factors impacting individual decision-making, trust in government. Many of us don't trust our government. Without mentioning specific names, we can see people we have in authority. We probably won't like to have them as neighbors. And even most likely, we probably won't allow them to be CEOs of companies we work in. We can't even allow them to be our managers. But again, they are the people making decisions on our behalf. We don't trust them most of the time. And again, it is valid. But again, one thing we need to remember is that the scientists who are saying things are not part of the government, okay? Because the government makes decisions based on political will. And that's why, again, we need to remember that when it comes to the development of vaccines and treatment, it is not government that actually does the development itself. It's actually done by scientists who are just like every other individual like me or yourself, who just want the best for themselves, for their community, and for their family as well. Commonest reason people have concerns about vaccines, particularly in the case of the vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine, well, almost a quarter of people think the vaccines may not be safe enough. Again, we've discussed about this, that, yes, compared to vaccine, the problem you could have with the vaccine and compared with the problem people could experience as a result of not taking the vaccine, I think, based on that slide I showed earlier, showing the efficacy for the vaccine for the Pfizer trial, it is very clear that it would be a bit ignorant for one to begin to compare the option of taking a vaccine and not taking the vaccine. Concerned about possible side effects, and we've said it several times, that look, again, side effects of the vaccine and compared to the side effect of the COVID itself. And I'll say it openly. I mean, we look at our prime minister. I mean, since he experienced it, I don't think he's fully recovered. If you look at him very clearly, I mean, it's people who survive the COVID itself. On the average, it takes more than 6 months for them for many of them to get back to normal, and some of them may never return back to normal again, because it's not easy putting someone on a ventilation machine. It's almost at the point of death that you do things like that. So I do not believe that COVID-19 is dangerous for my health. Well, okay. People say that, and they have the right to have a valid opinion. But again, the facts tells us something different. And there will always be people who reject vaccination on principles, which is fine. Some people refuse blood transfusion on principle, which is fine as well. And some people reject to take vaccination on principles as well. Again, we can't prevent everyone, and we can't get everyone to want to agree on it. And some people just say, well, it is best to let nature take their course. Well, in that case, again, it's down to the individual's choice. And I think it is just important for us to stress some of these facts. Now, coming close to the end, why should I take the vaccine? Well, generally speaking, vaccines are not new. Okay, and I think the main concern this time around is that all of us, all of a sudden, are being fast-tracked into taking something which we haven't had enough time to think about or to even analyze the implication for ourselves. But generally speaking, historically, we know that we've always taken vaccines, and it's been shown to protect individuals and their family from serious and potentially deadly diseases. Again, it's something that's very useful to protect other people in our community as well, by helping to stop diseases spreading to people who cannot have vaccines. Because quite frankly, to be presented the opportunity to even take the vaccines, you are lucky. People may be lucky, considered lucky, because there are some people, even though they want to take it, but because of their medical condition, they cannot take it. Because when they take it, it's going to create another. So because of their medical condition, they cannot take vaccines because it's pointless. Their body would not develop that resistance or the immunity that you want to achieve. So they can't take it, but they would like to take it. And unfortunately, for some of those people, there are people who could get sick very easily because they are not able to take the vaccine. So we need to have some of those things at the back of our mind as well. We need to understand that the vaccines have undergone rigorous safety testing before being introduced. Now, people keep saying, oh, they want to use it to change our DNA, to do all sorts of things. Let me be honest with you. If you really want treatment to change DNA, it's not going to be treatment you buy or they'll sell to you at £5 or $5. Treatment that will actually change people's DNA is going to cost you millions. And quite frankly, it's not even going to change the DNA. It's just going to change something that will help you treat something else. So you're not actually changing the DNA itself. So people are raising that concern, and people are raising concern. Oh, they want to use it to make us feel unwell. Trust me, if they want if the government really wants us to feel unwell, don't put it in vaccines. I mean, we drink water from the tap every day. we buy buy bread every day. We buy all sorts of things from the shop every day, but we don't have concerns about those things because people are not talking about it. Okay. And we all know what happens every time somebody raises a rumor about a particular product on the market. We see how people react to it, even when that rumor is not valid. Okay. So I think what's different this time around is that it is not the vaccine that is actually causing the concern or taking the vaccine. It's just most of the misinformation we have out there that is actually creating problem. Sometimes causes mild side effects that will not last long. And I think I've spoken about that already. Yes, it does cause some mild effect, but again, in many instances, they do not last long. Generally speaking, when we develop medicines, we always look for concerns that could last long. And those concerns that tend to last long, we tend to monitor it for a very long period of time. So if we think the effects of something will last very long, we would put measures in place to monitor those things over a long period of time. Reduce or even get rid of some diseases if enough people are vaccinated. And again, I think this is a final point for me here, because if for this to work, enough people needs to either be protected from it to make sure that it works. Because if we don't have enough protection within the community itself, all of this may have just been a waste of effort. And again, a very good, important reminder as well that we know that vaccines help prevent up to 3 million deaths worldwide every year. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because, as I said earlier, this is what many of us do. We monitor these things around the world on a regular basis. It's not when COVID happened that we now started talking about vaccines. We've been talking about this for years. There are multiple groups around the world that monitor vaccines around the world, how they affect, what is happening to the impact on people, on children as well. Something we do on a regular basis. And I think I would end up with this very catchy slide here. Keep yourself informed. Make an informed decision on facts, not on fiction. At the end of the day, we never tell people how to live their lives. We don't insist, we don't legislate what people should do and what people shouldn't do. As doctors, at the end of the day, we give people advice, something we know that is sound and that has been tested to help them make up their own mind what they should do. Anti-vax, vaccine hesitancy, geopolitics, we need to be very careful as well. Part of the misinformation we're having out there some of it is purely capitalism, to be quite frank with you. If I want to sell my medicine to you, I will look for something that is bad with the other person's medicine. It's as simple as that. I mean, we see it in the adverts every day when Lidl is comparing itself with Audi, on adverts on TV. Lidl will tell you it's cheaper here, or it's cheaper than Tesco, or Sainsbury's will tell you it's cheaper than Asda. Now, this is exactly what's happening. But in this instance here, what we need to be very careful is that the only way people send out that information is to tell people that the other ones is not as good as ours. And indirectly, you are telling people that it is bad. And we've seen some of this information come from different parts of the world saying that, oh, people who take the vaccines will turn into monkeys. Well, you need to show me 40,000 monkeys first before I believe. In fact, you need to show me one person who has turned into a monkey after taking the trial vaccine for me to begin to accept that. And is it even possible? Let us open up our minds to it. Is it really possible for that to happen? It is impossible, and it's even unlikely remotely. So I think at the end of the day, we need to open up our minds, listen to information which is genuine, and try to avoid things which could essentially lead to us making wrong decision. So alhamdulillah, I think without saying any much more, I think we've tried our best to present what we know. Okay, and Allahu Alam, and we don't know everything. Wallahi, we don't know everything. And again, and I'm saying this because at the end of the day, we can only say what we know, and try to dispel misinformation that's out there. But more importantly, of course, if new information come up that we are aware of, that we have been made aware of course, we will share that with everyone as well. And of course, alhamdulillah, that Allah has, provided us with the gift of Islam, because at the end of the day, wallahi, whatever we do, without the support, without Allah's will included in it, it is just for no reason as well. So aquli qawli hadha astaghfirullah wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.